All around the world, they weigh silent witnesses to a history no one remembers. Stones that weigh as much as airplanes. Walls that earthquakes cannot break. Blocks carved with perfect precision, better than anything described in ancient writings. Yet every culture that found these structures has stayed silent about them. What if the world's giant stone structures are not separate mysteries, but fingerprints of a civilization that disappeared without a trace? They sit on mountain tops, in jungle clearings, along desert plains, and beneath forests where no written record ever explained why they were built. No matter the continent, no matter the culture that later built on top of them, the stones share one thing in common. They do not fit the story we were taught about human history. History tells us that complexity grew slowly. Villages became cities, stone tools became pyramids, small communities became empires. We are asked to believe that knowledge built up step by step, each generation adding to the last, building upward from nothing. Yet everywhere these giant stones appear, they go against that idea. At site after site, the oldest layers are always the most perfect. Blocks cut with mathematical perfection, surfaces polished as if by machines, joints that have survived thousands of years without moving even a millimeter. Later civilizations, Inca, Roman, Egyptian dynasties, Polynesian voyagers reused these foundations, but not one could match their skill. If progress moved forward in a straight line, how can it be that the oldest stones show the greatest skill? Stand at Sacsayhuman in Peru, where 200-ton blocks fit together in geometric puzzles that modern engineers struggle to copy. Travel to Ollantaytambo, where pink granite giant stones have cut straighter than industrial saw marks. Cross the ocean to Lebanon's Baalbek, where 3 foundation stones weighing nearly 1,000 tons sit lined up with unexplainable precision. On Bolivia's high plateau, Pumapunku-shaped blocks carved from andesite show precision measured in tiny fractions of millimeters. On Easter Island, Vinapu's basalt walls look like Andean construction, though separated by 6,000 miles of ocean. Even in Montana, sage wall granite seams echo the same many-sided mastery. And in Siberia's frozen mountains, Gornaya Shoria's blocks, some over 3,000 tons, rise against the mountainside in formations that geology alone cannot explain. Site after site, continent after continent, the pattern repeats itself like a chorus in a forgotten song. There are no inscriptions describing how these stones were moved, cut, or lifted. No ancient text that describes the techniques. Civilizations that documented harvests, trade, astronomy, and royal family lines somehow forgot to mention the greatest engineering achievements they inherited. Cultures that recorded daily rituals, military campaigns, and divine prophecies left no words about moving mountains. It is as though the knowledge itself had been erased, not just forgotten, but deliberately removed from memory. Traditional archaeology explains each site separately. The Inca must have shaped Sacsayhuman with bronze chisels and patience. Romans must have transported Baalbek's trilthin through pure manpower. The Tiwanaku culture must have carved Pumapunku with primitive tools. Polynesians must have fitted Easter Island's basalt through trial and error alone. But when these explanations are placed side by side, their unlikeliness becomes obvious. Can so many different cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years have independently discovered techniques that even today would challenge industrial equipment? How many times must the unlikely repeat before we see it as a pattern rather than coincidence? Perhaps the giant stones are not separate wonders at all. Perhaps they are fragments of a single forgotten story. A story of knowledge that once spanned the globe, then fell silent. Legends across continents recall catastrophe. Floods that swallowed coastlines. Fire from the sky. Seas that rose overnight. Could these stones be the survivors of that erasure? Foundations deliberately built to last when everything else was swept away. Listen closely. The stones speak not through words, but through their geometry, through the refusal of their seams to give in to time. They remind us that history is not a straight road, but a broken mirror. Beneath the official story lies another story, one that suggests we are not the first to master matter and design, not the first to reach beyond what seemed possible. In the quiet of night, when the stars wheel above and the earth grows still, the walls seem almost alive. There. Silence is not emptiness but purpose. It waits for us to hear, and if we dare to listen, the journey begins. If this journey into forgotten history interests you, if you'd like to explore more mysteries designed for quiet hours, consider subscribing and leaving a like. Each one of these helps preserve these stories and guides more curious minds to this space where ancient puzzles meet peaceful thinking. Also, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Not in Mesopotamia or Egypt, but in the stones themselves. Above the city of Cusco, where the Andes cradle the sky, a fortress of impossible design rises. The walls do more than refuse silence. They demand attention. They are known as Sacsayhuman, the royal falcon, and they may be the first voice in this forgotten song. High above the rooftops of Cusco, where the Andes hold the horizon in jagged stone, rises a fortress that should not exist. From a distance, its walls appear as zigzag battlements carved into the hillside. But as you get closer, the mystery deepens. These are not ordinary walls. They are a riddle cut into stone. Each block towers over the visitor, some as tall as a house, others weighing as much as 200 tons. Yet they do not sit like simple rectangles. Every stone is a polygon with a dozen or more sides, carved and angled to lock together with its neighbors in a three-dimensional puzzle of impossible complexity. The joints are so tight that even after centuries of earthquakes and mountain rains, not a single stone has slipped. You cannot slide a sheet of paper into the seams. This is precision beyond any reasonable expectation for a culture set to rely on bronze chisels, rope, and pure manpower. Imagine trying to design such a wall today. You would begin with computer models, digital scans, and 3D drawings. Cranes would lift each block, repositioning them dozens of times until they settled into place. Even then, precision of less than a millimeter would be rare. Now, imagine doing it without machines, without steel, without the mathematics we take for granted. The stones of Sacsayhuman do not only fit. They seem to have been thought of as parts of a single geometric vision. Each surface anticipating the angle of another, each curve distributing weight across multiple points. Why build this way? The traditional answer is earthquake resistance. Many-sided joints allow the walls to sway without collapsing, flexing like stone muscles when the earth shakes. But this answer creates a deeper mystery. How did the builders know such techniques would work? Earthquake engineering is not obvious. It requires observation, testing, and theoretical understanding. The Inca left no records describing experiments, no instruction manuals of design. They left only the walls themselves, as if the knowledge had vanished the moment the stones were set. Archaeologists speak of construction phases at Sacsayhuman, and here the pattern becomes unmistakable. The lowest and most massive blocks display the greatest sophistication. Above them rise smaller stones fitted with less care, more in keeping with known Inca methods. This sequence tells a quiet story. The Inca inherited these foundations rather than created them. They built upon what they found, filling in gaps with their own workmanship, but they never equaled the mastery of the early slayers. The further upward the wall climbs, the less precise it becomes, an echo of knowledge fading over time. Walk along the edge and you will notice something even stranger. Many stones have small knobs, bumps that serve no obvious purpose. They do not add strength. They do not help in construction, at least not in any way modern engineers recognize. Some suggest they were grips for lifting, but the knobs are often too small, too irregularly placed. Others propose they are leftovers of a shaping process, evidence of tools or techniques now lost. Whatever their purpose, they appear across giant stone sites worldwide, a signature repeating itself like a maker's mark. Then there are the scoop marks, curved ends carved into the surface of certain blocks, as if the stone had been softened and scooped out while bendable. No known Inca tool produces such marks. They resemble the action of hands pressing into clay. Yet the material is andesite, one of the hardest volcanic rocks on Earth. The marks do not appear random. They follow patterns clustering near joints and edges, suggesting intention rather than accident. The stones whisper a language we have forgotten how to read. 20 miles northwest, nestled in the Sacred Valley, lies another mystery. Ollantaytambo rises in terraces against the mountainside, a fortress-temple combination where farming and astronomy once intertwined. But it is not the terraces that demand attention. It is the Temple of the Sun, an unfinished structure perched on the upper levels, built from stones that defy every explanation offered for their presence. 6 giant slabs of pink granite stand lined up in a row, each weighing between 70 and 100 tons. They are not native to this location. Geological surveys trace their origin to a quarry across the valley over 4 miles away, and on the opposite side of the Urubamba River. To transport them would require crossing water, climbing steep slopes, and maneuvering through terrain that offers no clear path for such weight. Yet here they stand. The cuts are impossibly straight. Run your hand along the edges, and you will find surfaces polished smooth, angles precise to a degree that resembles machine work. Drill holes pierce some blocks with uniform depth and width, showing no deviation, no wobble from handheld tools. In places the stones have marks that look like saw cuts, clean straight grooves that slice through granite, as if it were soft wood. If these were the only oddities, they might be dismissed as patience and skill. But scattered below the terraces, abandoned along ancient paths, lie massive blocks in various stages of transport. Some rest on stone rollers. Others sit half-shaped as though work stopped mid-task and was never continued. One block, estimated at over 50 tons, balances dangerously on a hillside, its surface marked with the same precision cuts found in the finished structures above. Why were they abandoned? The standard story suggests the Spanish conquest interrupted construction, forcing workers to flee. But the Inca were master record keepers. They used quipus knotted cords to track taxes, harvests, work duties, even astronomical observations. Yet nowhere in the surviving quipus, nowhere in the Spanish records that documented Inca life in obsessive detail, is there mention of quarrying granite giant stones, transporting 100-ton blocks, or engineering the foundations of Ollantaytambo. The silence is noticeable. Spanish writers described Inca stonework with admiration, noting how stones fit together without cement. They documented the work systems, the road networks, the farming innovations. But when it came to the giant foundations, the massive many-sided blocks, the precision-cut granite, the engineering beyond Roman capability, they said nothing. It is as though the Inca themselves did not know how these works were accomplished, as though they were caretakers of a legacy they could describe, but not copy. This pattern repeats across Peru. At site after site, the largest and most precise stones form the foundation, while later additions show clearly declining quality. The many-sided stonework gives way to rectangular blocks with visible gaps. The multi-ton giants are replaced by stones a single person could lift. The precision fades as if the builders were copying a style they admired but no longer fully understood. If the Inca built Sacsayhuman and Ollantaytambo from the ground up, why does their craftsmanship get worse as the walls rise? If they possessed the knowledge to move 100-ton stones and carve them with millimeter precision, why did they lose that knowledge while still building on top of the very foundations they supposedly created? The answer archaeology offers is gradual skill loss, worker shortages, changing priorities. But these explanations feel empty when you stand before the stones themselves. The gap in capability is not gradual. It is a canyon. It suggests not evolution but inheritance, not innovation but imitation. The earliest layers are the most advanced. The deeper you dig, the more sophisticated the work becomes. This is the reversal that haunts every giant stone site in Peru, the impossible flip that refuses to fit the story of straight-line progress. Perhaps the Inca did not build these foundations at all. Perhaps they found them already ancient, already weathered by centuries or thousands of years. Perhaps they recognized greatness beyond their reach and chose to honor it, building upward from what they could not recreate, preserving what they could not explain. If so, then these stones are not Inca monuments. They are something far older, voices from a world that vanished before history began to keep written records. And Peru, with its silent giants and impossible precision, becomes the first anchor point in a story that stretches far beyond the Andes. The question is no longer whether the Inca built these walls. The question is who did. If Peru's giant stones whisper of a forgotten past, Lebanon shouts it from foundations that defy not only explanation but belief. Half a world away from the Andes, in the Bekaa Valley, where Mediterranean winds carry the scent of cedar and ancient earth, stands a temple complex that Romans claimed as their own. But beneath their columns, beneath their courtyards and altars, lies something far older, a platform of stone so massive that even today, with cranes and hydraulics and computer-aided engineering, we would struggle to copy their placements. This is Baalbek, known to the Romans as Heliopolis, the city of the sun, and at its heart lies a mystery carved in limestone. 3 foundation stones weighing nearly 1,000 tons each, set 20 feet above ground level, aligned with such precision that their joints remain sealed after 2,000 years of earthquakes, wars, and weathering. They are called the trilithon, and they should not exist. Approach Baalbek from the east, and the Roman temple complex dominates the skyline. 6 standing columns of the Temple of Jupiter rising like fingers against the Lebanese sky. The architecture is recognizably Roman Corinthian capitals, ornate friezes, carved acanthus leaves curling in stone. But descend to the foundation, to the base upon which Rome built its grandest eastern temple, and the character of the stonework changes entirely. The trilithon sits embedded in the western wall of the platform, 3 giant blocks placed side by side in perfect horizontal alignment. Each stone measures approximately 65 feet long, 14 feet high, and 12 feet deep. Conservative estimates place their weight between 900 and 1,000 tons. Some calculations push higher. To grasp the scale, a fully loaded Boeing 747 weighs around 400 tons. Each stone of the trilithon weighs more than 2 passenger jets. Yet they are not sitting on the ground. They rest 20 feet above the foundation level, fitted into a retaining wall with such exactness that the seams between them measure less than a millimeter. No cement binds them. No metal clamps hold them in place. They simply sit, locked by their own weight and the impossible precision of their cutting, as if gravity alone were insufficient explanation for their stability. Stand before them and the questions multiply. How were they quarried? How were they transported from the quarry a quarter-mile away? How were they lifted 20 feet into the air? And perhaps most troubling, how were they positioned with such accuracy that modern surveyors, using laser equipment, find their alignment nearly perfect? The Romans documented everything. They left detailed accounts of aqueduct construction, bridge engineering, road building, and siege works. Roman engineers wrote books on lifting devices, on the use of cranes and pulleys, on the mathematics of load distribution. Yet nowhere in the vast collection of Roman literature is there a single mention of how the trilithon was moved or set in place. The silence is not accidental. It is the silence of inheritance, not invention. The mystery deepens in the quarry. A quarter-mile south of the temple complex, still partially embedded in bedrock, lies an even larger stone. It is known as Hajar al-Hibla, the stone of the pregnant woman, a giant stone measuring 70 feet long, and weighing an estimated 1,000 to 1,200 tons. It sits fully carved, its edges finished, its surfaces smooth, ready for transport, but never moved. And beneath it, discovered only in recent decades, lie two more giants. One exceeds 1,200 tons. The other may reach 1,650 tons, making it one of the largest work stones ever quarried by human hands. They rest in layers as though the quarry operated on a scale and timeline we cannot understand, producing blocks for projects that never reach completion. Why carve stones so large if you cannot move them? The traditional answer suggests ambition exceeding ability. Ancient engineers who miscalculated, who began work on stones they later realized they could not transport. But this explanation requires us to believe that the same civilization capable of precision cutting thousand-ton blocks somehow failed to understand the limits of their own technology before investing huge labor in carving them. It requires us to believe they made the same mistake multiple times. A simpler explanation emerges. The stones were carved by builders who could move them using methods now lost. The abandonment came later when that knowledge vanished, when later cultures inherited a quarry filled with impossibilities they could describe but not copy. Examine the temple complex closely and a striking pattern emerges. The stonework divides into layers, each layer reflecting a different age and capability. The giant foundation, including the trilithon, consists of massive limestone blocks fitted with minimal cement, their surfaces plain and undecorated. Above this foundation rises a layer of smaller, more uniform stones still impressive, but within the range of known Roman engineering. Higher still, the familiar Roman architecture begins columns, capitals, decorative carvings in the style of the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. The Romans built upward from a platform they did not create, adding their temples and courtyards on top of foundations already ancient when Rome arrived. Roman coins, pottery, and inscriptions date the visible temple to the reign of Augustus and his successors. But the giant platform beneath offers no such dating evidence. No inscriptions mark the trilithon. No coins were found cemented between its blocks because no cement was used. The stones themselves provide no clue to their age. Limestone does not decay in ways that allow precise dating. We know when Rome built. We do not know when the foundation was laid. Arab historians writing in medieval times recorded local legends about Baalbek's origins. They spoke of the platform being built by giants before the biblical flood, by a race of beings with strength and knowledge surpassing ordinary humans. Some accounts attributed the construction to Cain, son of Adam, who supposedly founded the city as a refuge. Others claimed it was built by King Solomon through the labor of jinn, supernatural beings, who could manipulate stone as if it were clay. Dismiss these as mythology if you wish, but notice the pattern. Every tradition places the platform's construction in a time before recorded history, in an age when the world operated by different rules. The stories differ in their details, but agree on one point: the giant foundations are older than any known civilization in the region. Modern researchers have documented another oddity: magnetic anomalies concentrated within certain blocks of the trilithon. Compasses behave strangely near the stones, needles spinning without settling. Magnetometers register readings inconsistent with ordinary limestone. Some stones show magnetic properties while others do not, suggesting a process of selection or treatment that targeted specific blocks. The cause remains unexplained. Limestone is not naturally magnetic. Lightning strikes can magnetize rock, but not in the patterns observed at Baalbek. Some researchers propose the stones were subjected to extreme heat, possibly during shaping, that changed their magnetic signature. Others suggest the presence of iron-rich tools or unknown processes that left leftover magnetism in the structure of the stone itself. Whatever the cause, the oddities point to an interaction with the stones that went beyond simple quarrying and placement. Geologists examining the platform have noted another detail. Weathering patterns on the giant blocks differ from those on the Roman construction above them. The trilithon shows signs of deeper erosion, a smoothing of edges consistent with exposure measured not in centuries, but in thousands of years. Water damage appears more pronounced, suggesting the blocks weathered through periods of heavier rainfall than the region has experienced in recorded history, periods that align with the climate shifts at the end of the last ice age. If the foundation predates Rome by thousands of years, then Baalbek becomes more than an engineering mystery. It becomes a time anchor, a fixed point, suggesting that advanced stonework capability existed in the Levant long before Mesopotamian city-states, long before the first pharaohs, perhaps even before the last glaciers retreated. And if that is true, then the question is no longer how the trilithon was built, but who built it and what happened to them. Rome erected temples to Jupiter, Venus, and Bacchus on a platform they did not create. They added their glory to foundations laid by unknown hands, claiming mastery over a site that whispered of powers beyond their reach. The Romans were master builders, yet even they left no record of understanding how the base stones were set. They inherited greatness and called it their own, just as the Inca did in Peru. The pattern repeats. The oldest layers are the most sophisticated. The deeper you go, the more impossible the engineering becomes, and the silence of history grows louder with each site examined. Baalbek is not an oddity. It is a confirmation. From the Andes to the Levant, across 6,000 miles of ocean and desert, the same building language appears: massive stones, precision cutting, knowledge without documentation, mastery without explanation. If two sites separated by such distance show identical impossibilities, then perhaps they are not separate at all. Perhaps they are fragments of the same forgotten story, echoes of a civilization that built on a scale we have only begun to remember. High on the Altiplano of Bolivia, where the air thins to a whisper and the sky presses close enough to touch, lies a scatter of stones that should not exist. At 12,800 feet above sea level, in a landscape so empty that even breathing comes hard, the ruins of Pumapunku spread across the plateau like pieces of a shattered puzzle. The name means door of the Puma in Amar, though what doorway these stones once guarded remains unknown. But it is not their name that troubles archaeologists. It is their precision. Walk among the blocks and you will find cuts so straight they resemble the work of industrial saws. Drill holes that plunge through red sandstone and gray andesite with uniform depth and width, showing no wobble, no deviation from perfect vertical alignment. Surfaces polished to a reflective shine. Channels carved with parallel walls and 90-degree corners. Interlocking parts shaped with precision measured in tiny fractions of millimeters. This is not stonework. This is machining. And it was done in andesite, a volcanic rock ranked between 7 and 8 on the Mohs hardness scale, harder than most steel files, capable of shattering copper chisels on contact. Yet someone carved it with such exactness that modern engineers examining the blocks with measuring tools and laser measurement devices struggle to explain how such precision could be achieved without technology we consider modern. If Peru's stones whisper and Lebanon's shout, then Pumapunku's scream a mechanical perfection so alien that it forces us to question not just who built these structures, but what tools they possessed, and what knowledge they wielded. The site sits a mile from Tiwanaku, a sprawling ceremonial complex that archaeologists confidently credit to the Tiwanaku culture, which flourished between 500 and 1000 AD in the central Andes. Tiwanaku shows all the characteristics of known ancient construction: adobe, fieldstone, carved figures displaying cultural symbols, step pyramids built in recognizable stages. It is impressive, sophisticated, and entirely within the bounds of human capability as we understand it. Pumapunku is different. The most striking features are the blocks: massive slabs of red sandstone and andesite carved into shapes that lock together like industrial parts. Some weigh over 100 tons. Their surfaces are not roughly shaped, but precisely flattened to within millimeters across spans of several feet. Channels run along their edges in perfectly straight lines, cut to uniform depth and width. Grooves and notches allow blocks to fit together in arrangements that suggest modular construction pieces, designed to connect in specific ways, like sections of a kit waiting for assembly. Run a straight edge along the channels and you will find almost no deviation. Measure the drill holes, and you will discover that holes on opposite sides of a block align with precision that would challenge modern manufacturers working with computer-guided tools. The angles are perfect. The surfaces are smooth. The symmetry is absolute. This is not the work of patience alone. Patience does not produce millimeter precision. Trial and error does not create perfectly parallel walls and stone channels. Even if you granted ancient masons unlimited time, unlimited workers, and unlimited copper chisels, you would not arrive at Pumapunku. You would arrive at something cruder, something getting close to precision, but falling short in ways the eye can forgive. Pumapunku's stonework offers nothing to forgive. It is exact. Examine the drill holes more closely. They pierce blocks of andesite in regular patterns. Some holes barely an inch across, others wider, all plunging straight down through stone that resists modern drill bits. The holes show no sign of packing, the gradual chipping away of material that characterizes primitive drilling. Instead, they appear cored, as if a rotating tool removed material in a continuous spiral, leaving smooth walls and uniform depth. Core drilling requires hard rotating bits, diamantate or carbide tools, capable of grinding through igneous rock. The Tiwanaku culture is not known to have possessed such technology. Copper and bronze, their primary metals, are too soft to cut andesite effectively. Stone tools work only through pounding and grinding, processes that leave distinctive marks: peck marks, scratches, irregular surfaces. Pumapunku's stones show none of these. Instead, the drill holes are smooth, as if the tool that made them slice through andesite the way modern bits cut through wood. Some holes are so precisely placed that they form patterns, geometric arrangements suggesting planning, measurement, and a system of design that anticipated how parts would connect. In places, channels intersect drill holes at perfect right angles, the kind of junction that requires either extraordinary skill or tools that cut without deviation. Then there are the channels themselves, long grooves carved into the blocks, running parallel to edges, turning corners at 90 degrees without rounding or overcutting. These channels are not decorative. They served a function, perhaps to secure metal clamps, perhaps to guide the placement of other stones, perhaps for purposes we can no longer recognize. But whatever their use, they were cut with a level of control that suggests the builders worked from precise plans, executing designs that left no room for guessing. This is engineered stone, not sculpted stone. The difference is fundamental. Among the scattered blocks lie fragments that tell an even stranger story: unfinished pieces, half-carved parts frozen mid-process, as though work stopped suddenly and was never resumed. One block displays a channel cut halfway along its length before the line ends abruptly. Another shows drill holes begun, but not completed, shallow dents that mark where a tool started its work. A massive slab lies cracked and abandoned, its surface partially smoothed, the transition from rough to polished visible in a single stone. These unfinished pieces are rare gifts to researchers, glimpses into the construction process itself, evidence of technique captured mid-action. They suggest a catastrophic interruption, a moment when the builders stopped work not by choice but by necessity. Perhaps an earthquake shattered the tools. Perhaps a flood swept through the site. Perhaps the knowledge bearers themselves vanished, leaving half-completed projects behind like sentences cut off mid-word. What is clear is that the work did not decline gradually. There is no progression from precision to crudeness, no sense of skill degrading over time. Instead, the record shows abrupt stopping, machine-like perfection followed by silence. The contrast with Tiwanaku amplifies the mystery. At Tiwanaku proper, less than a mile away, the stonework is skilled but conventional. The Gateway of the Sun, the site's most famous monument, displays intricate carving, but nothing approaching Pumapunku's mechanical exactness. The stones fit well but not seamlessly. The surfaces are shaped but not polished to reflective perfection. The stonework speaks of human hands guided by skill and patience, not of processes that go beyond traditional cinemasonry. This gap is stark. If the same culture built both sites, why does one show capabilities the other lacks? If the Tiwanaku people carved Pumapunku's blocks with millimetric precision, why did they not apply that precision to their ceremonial structures a mile away? Why would a civilization capable of machining andesite settle for fieldstone work in its primary temple complex? The explanation archaeologists offer is phased construction. Pumapunku is an earlier experimental site that informed later building at Tiwanaku. But this reverses the expected pattern. Experimental phases are typically cruder than refined phases. Prototypes show trial and error. Yet Pumapunku represents the peak of sophistication, while Tiwanaku reflects something more modest. Once again, the oldest work is the most advanced. Once again, we encounter inheritance rather than innovation. A later culture building on top of or alongside foundations they could admire but not copy. The Tiwanaku people may have used Pumapunku, may have considered it sacred, may have conducted ceremonies among its ruins, but the evidence suggests they did not build it, at least not the giant parts that define its character. They inherited a mystery and called it their own, just as the Inca did at Sacsayhuaman, just as the Romans did at Baalbek. And legends offer tantalizing fragments of context, stories passed down through Quechua and Aymara oral traditions. They speak of Viracocha, a figure who appears after a great catastrophe, floods that destroyed the previous world, darkness that covered the land, chaos that unmade civilization. Viracocha emerges from the waters of Lake Titicaca, just miles from Pumapunku, and begins the work of rebuilding. He is described as a teacher, a culturbringer who instructs humanity in agriculture, astronomy, architecture, and the arts. He shapes mountains, calls forth the sun, and establishes order where destruction reigned. When his work is finished, he departs across the Pacific, walking on water, promising to return. The legends are mythic in tone, yet they preserve a striking detail. Viracocha teaches skills that already existed before the catastrophe. He is not inventing knowledge from nothing but restoring what was lost, passing down wisdom from an earlier age. The stories frame him as a survivor, a messenger from the world before the flood, a keeper of memories, trying to ensure the knowledge does not die completely. If these legends contain even a kernel of historical truth, they suggest Pumapunku's origins lie before a catastrophic reset built by a culture that possessed advanced capabilities, then destroyed by upheaval, leaving only fragments and fading memories behind. How then were the stones of Pumapunku shaped? Theories multiply in the absence of evidence, each attempting to bridge the gap between what exists and what should be possible. Some researchers propose stone softening, a technique in which rock is temporarily made bendable through chemical or heat means, allowing it to be shaped like clay before hardening again. Andean legends speak of plants that could dissolve stone, potions that made rock soft to the touch. Dismiss it as folklore. Yet the scoop marks of Sacsayhuaman and the impossibly tight joints of Pumapunku suggest stone that behave differently than it should. Others point to extreme heat, proposing that blocks were subjected to temperatures high enough to turn surfaces glassy, creating glass-like coatings that could then be polished smooth. Some stones of Pumapunku display characteristics consistent with heat treatment, discoloration, surface changes, brittleness in specific areas. But achieving such temperatures without modern kilns or industrial furnaces remains unexplained. A third theory suggests acoustic or vibration-based techniques, the use of sound frequencies to weaken molecular bonds in stone, effectively softening it through vibration. Ancient texts from various cultures hint at technologies involving sound: Tibetan monks levitating stones with horns and drums, Egyptian priests smoothing blocks with chanting, biblical accounts of walls falling to trumpets. A vibration can shatter glass and crack bridges, perhaps it can also change stone in ways we have not yet rediscovered. But perhaps the answer is simpler and more troubling. Advanced tools now lost: diamond-tip saws, carbide drills, laser cutting devices, or technologies so different from our own that we cannot recognize their traces. The tool marks may be there, but we lack the framework to interpret them. Whatever the method, it produces results we cannot copy with the technologies we attribute to Bronze Age cultures. And until we can explain the mechanism, we cannot explain the builders. Pumapunku is the third anchor in a story stretching across continents. Peru showed us many-sided stonework beyond Inca capability. Lebanon revealed foundation stones beyond Roman engineering. Now Bolivia presents something more unsettling: stone that looks as though it passed through a factory that did not exist. The pattern solidifies. The oldest layers are the most advanced. The techniques appear without warning and vanish without trace. The cultures that inherited these sites left no record of their construction, no explanation of their methods, only silence where there should be documentation. 3 points define a triangle. 3 sites separated by thousands of miles, yet sharing signatures too specific to be coincidence: massive scale, impossible precision, and the quiet insistence that history as we know it is incomplete. Pumapunku forces a question sharper than any drill bit that shaped its stones. If human civilization develops slowly, why do the earliest constructions show the highest technology? The answer waits in the stones: silent, precise, and impossibly old. These channels are not just for decoration. They may have held metal clamps, helped line up other stones, or been used for reasons we no longer understand. But whatever they were for, they were cut so carefully that it seems the builders followed exact plans and did not allow any guessing. This is engineered stone, not sculpted stone. The difference is very important. Among the scattered blocks are broken pieces that tell an even stranger story. Unfinished pieces, half-carved parts, frozen in the middle of being made, as if the work stopped suddenly and never started again. One block shows a channel cut halfway along its length, and then the line stops suddenly. Another shows drill holes that were started but not finished. Shallow dents mark where a tool began its work. A massive slab lies cracked and abandoned, with part of its surface smooth. The change from rough to polished is visible on a single stone. These unfinished pieces are rare gifts to researchers: glimpses into the building process itself. Proof of technique captured mid-action. They suggest a disastrous interruption, a moment when the builders stopped working not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Maybe an earthquake broke their tools. Maybe a flood rushed through the site. Maybe the knowledge bearers themselves disappeared, leaving half-finished projects behind like sentences cut off mid-word. What is clear is that the work did not slowly get worse. There is no shift from precise to sloppy, no sign that skill faded over time. Instead, the record shows an abrupt stop page: machine-like perfection followed by silence. The contrast with Tiwanaku makes the mystery even bigger. At Tiwanaku proper, less than a mile away, the stonework is capable but ordinary. The Gateway of the Sun, the site's most famous monument, has detailed carving, but nothing close to Pumapunku's mechanical exactness. The stones fit well, but not perfectly. The surfaces are shaped, but not polished to mirror-like perfection. The masonry shows human hands guided by skill and patience, not processes that go beyond traditional stoneworking. This break in quality is shocking. If the same culture built both sites, why does one show abilities the other does not? If the Tiwanaku people carved Puma's H blocks with millimeter precision, why did they not use that precision on their ceremonial buildings a mile away? Why would a civilization able to machine andesite settle for fieldstone masonry in its main temple complex? The explanation archaeologists give is phase construction: Puma as an earlier experimental site that influenced later building at Tiwanaku. But this flips the normal pattern. Experimental stages are usually rougher than refined stages. Prototypes show trial and error. Yet Pumapunku is the peak of sophistication, while Tiwanaku looks more modest. Once again, the oldest work is the most advanced. Once again, we see inheritance instead of innovation: a later culture building on top of, or beside, foundations they could admire but not copy. The Tiwanaku people may have used Pumapunku, may have seen it as sacred, may have held ceremonies among its ruins, but the evidence suggests they did not build it, at least not the megalithic parts that give it its identity. They inherited a mystery and claimed it as their own, just as the Inca did at Sacsayhuman, just as the Romans did at Baalbek. Andean legends offer tempting hints of context. Stories passed down through Quechua and Aymar. Oral traditions speak of Viracocha, a figure who appears after a great cataclysm: floods that destroyed the previous world, darkness that covered the land, chaos that tore civilization apart. Viracocha rises from the waters of Lake Titicaca, just miles from Pumapunku, and begins rebuilding. He is described as a teacher, a culturbringer, who teaches people agriculture, astronomy, architecture, and the arts. He shapes mountains, calls forth the sun, and brings order where destruction ruled. When his work is done, he leaves across the Pacific, walking on water, promising to return. The legends sound mythical, yet they keep one striking detail. Viracocha teaches skills that already existed before the cataclysm. He is not creating knowledge from nothing, he is restoring what was lost, passing down wisdom from an earlier time. The stories show him as a survivor or messenger from the world before the flood. The keeper of memories trying to make sure knowledge does not vanish completely. If these legends hold even a small piece of historical truth, they suggest Pumapunku began before a catastrophic reset built by a culture with advanced abilities, then destroyed by upheaval, leaving only fragments and fading memories behind. So how were the stones of Pumapunku shaped? In the lack of proof, theories multiply, each trying to close the gap between what exists and what should be possible. Some researchers suggest stone softening, a method where rock is temporarily made flexible using chemicals or heat, so it can be shaped like clay before hardening again. Andean legends speak of plants that could dissolve stone, potions that made rock soft to the touch. Call it folklore. Yet the scoop marks of Sacsayhuman and the unbelievably tight joints of Pumapunku suggest stone that acted differently than it should. Others point to extreme heat, suggesting blocks were exposed to temperatures high enough to vitrify surfaces, creating glass-like coatings that could then be polished smooth. Some stones of Pumapunku show signs that match heat treatment, discoloration, surface changes, brittleness in certain areas. But how such temperatures were reached without modern kilns or industrial furnaces is still unexplained. A third theory suggests acoustic or resonance-based methods using sound frequencies to weaken molecular bonds in stone, effectively softening it through vibration. Ancient texts from many cultures hint at sound-based technologies. Tibetan monks levitating stones with horns and drums. Egyptian priests moving blocks with chanting. Biblical stories of walls falling to trumpets. If vibration can shatter glass and crack bridges, maybe it can also change stone in ways we have not yet rediscovered. Or maybe the answer is simpler and more unsettling. Advanced tools now lost, diamond-tipped saws, carbide drills, laser-cutting devices, or technologies so different from ours that we cannot recognize their traces. The tool marks may be there, but we do not have the way of thinking needed to read them. Whatever the method was, it created results we cannot copy with the tools we usually assign to Bronze Age cultures. And until we can explain the method, we cannot explain the builders. Pumapunku is the third anchor in a story stretching across continents. Peru showed us polygonal masonry beyond Inca ability. Lebanon revealed foundation stones beyond Roman engineering. Now Bolivia presents something even more disturbing, stone that looks like it came from a factory that did not exist. The pattern becomes clear. The oldest layers are the most advanced. The techniques appear with no lead-up and disappear with no trace. The cultures that inherited these places left no record of how they were built, no explanation of the methods, only silence where there should be writing. 3 points make a triangle. 3 sites thousands of miles apart, yet sharing signatures too specific to be an accident. Massive scale, impossible precision, and the quiet message that the history we know is incomplete. Pumapunku forces a sharper question than any drill bit that cut its stones. If human civilization developed slowly, why do the earliest constructions show the highest technology? The answer waits in the stone, silent, precise, and impossibly old. From the Altiplano of Bolivia, travel west across mountains, deserts, and coastline, until you reach the edge of South America. Then keep going over the Pacific across 2,300 miles of open ocean past any visible land, beyond the reach of any known ancient navigation, until you arrive at one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. Easter Island rises from the sea like a volcanic afterthought, a triangular speck of land, only about 64 square miles, culturally closer to the moon than to any continent. The nearest inhabited land is more than 1,200 miles away. To the east, the South American coast fades past the horizon. To the west, Polynesia spreads across thousands of miles of scattered atolls. Easter Island sits alone, a dot in an empty ocean. It should be unique. Its isolation should have created Oneophakine traditions, architecture born from local invention, cultural fingerprints found nowhere else. And in many ways, it is unique. The moai, those huge stone heads staring over the coast, exists nowhere else on Earth. But at a place called Vinapu on the island's southern shore, stands a wall that should not exist. A wall that breaks the rules of isolation. A wall that seems to whisper of connections across impossible distances. A wall identical to ones found in Peru. Vinapu is not famous. Tourists go to Reino Araku to see unfinished moai, to Ahitongariki to photograph the 15 standing statues, to Anacanet to trace petroglyphs carved into cleft-top stones. Few visit Vinapu, and those who do often walk past without noticing what makes it extraordinary. But look closely at the platform's foundation, the Ahu, the stone base where the moai once stood, and you will see what has troubled researchers since the first archaeological surveys recorded the site. The wall is built from basalt blocks fitted in tight polygonal masonry, with curved interlocking edges, surfaces shaped to nest together, with joints so exact that no mortar was needed. If this sounds familiar, it should. Run your hand along the seams, and it could be Sacsayhuman, 2,300 miles to the east. The technique is the same. Many-sided blocks, curved edges, precision fitting, earthquake-resistant design. Even the visual rhythm matches. The same natural-looking geometry, the same refusal of right angles, replaced by complex interlocking shapes that spread weight and resist sideways movement. The basalt is local, quarried from Easter Island's volcanic rock. But the way it was shaped, the building mints it, the engineering grammar, these are not local. Archaeologists admit the similarity but struggle to explain it. Convergent evolution, they say two isolated cultures separately finding the same solutions to similar problems. But convergent evolution makes lookalikes, not copies. Birds and bats both evolved flight, but their wings are built differently. Eyes evolved separately in octopuses and vertebrates, yet their structures differ in key ways. Vinapu's wall does not just resemble Andean masonry. It repeats it. The curves match. The tolerances match. The construction philosophy matches. When Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl documented Vinapu in detail, he photographed the wall from many angles and placed the images beside photos of Peruvian sites. Without labels, you could not tell them apart. Coincidence buckles under that level of exactness. If polygonal masonry appeared on Easter Island in a rough form copied loosely, simplified, adjusted to local needs, convergence might explain it. But this is not a rough copy. This is precision done in a style so specific it acts like a signature. Either Andean masons traveled 2,300 miles across open ocean to build on Easter Island, or Easter Islanders independently invented a technique identical in every important detail to one used on a continent they were supposedly never in contact with. Or a third possibility appears: both inherited the technique from a source older than either culture. We are told the ocean was a barrier to ancient people. Without compasses, without maps, without knowing currents and winds, travel beyond coasts was considered impossible. Yet more and more evidence suggests the Pacific was not a barrier, but a highway, a system of currents and seasonal winds that, once understood, allowed purposeful long-distance voyages. Genetic studies tell a story written in DNA. Polynesians carry markers tracing back to Southeast Asia, confirming migrations across thousands of miles of open water. But even more interesting are markers found in South American and Polynesian populations' traces, suggesting contact long before Europeans arrived. A 2020 genetic study found Native American DNA in modern Polynesians, with dates placing the contact event around 1200 AD. The signal is strongest in eastern Polynesia, the Marquesas, the Society Islands, and especially Easter Island. The simplest explanation is that Polynesians reached South America, or South Americans reached Polynesia. But both groups met somewhere in between. The evidence goes beyond genetics. The sweet potato, a crop first domesticated in South America, shows up in Polynesian farming, long before European explorers could have brought it. Language supports the plant evidence. The Quechua word for sweet potato is kumar, while Polynesians called it kumar. That match is not an accident. Polynesians sailed to South America, encountered the Andes, and came back with more than a crop. They brought knowledge, farming methods, navigation skills, and possibly architectural ideas, including how to shape stone into tight polygonal patterns. Or the exchange went the other way. Andean sailors, descendants of a culture that once worked huge stone with a precision we struggle to copy, sailed west and reached Easter Island, bringing the engineering traditions of Sacsayhuman and Ollantaytambo. Or, more boldly, both cultures inherited the technique from a much older seafaring civilization, one that traveled the Pacific before sea levels rose, before the last ice age ended, when the ocean map was different, and islands now underwater still stood above the waves. Easter Island's oral traditions keep fragments that hint a deeper history. The Rapa Nui tell of two groups living on the island long ago: the Hanauip, the long ears, and the Hanaumamoko, the short ears. The names come from ear stretching, but the legend suggests more than appearance. They describe cultural and technological differences. The Hanauip are shown as the earlier people, the skilled builders who carved the moai and raised the ahu platforms. The Hanaumamoko arrived later, and tensions eventually turned into war. In the most dramatic version, the Hanaumamoko rose up, trapped the Hanauip in a trench filled with fire, and wiped them out in one catastrophic event. The legends may remember a real conflict, but they also match a pattern found across the Pacific: stories of earlier peoples, better as stonework, displaced or destroyed by later rivals. Polynesian myths from Tahiti to Hawaii speak of the Manahune, or Menahune, a race of master builders who made temples and platforms before the ancestors of today's people arrived. These are not random stories. They form a consistent tradition: the greatest builders came first, and then they vanished. Even the moai carry hints of lost knowledge. Some statues, weighing up to 80 tons, were moved from the quarry at Raino Araku to platforms miles away across rough land. Conventional archaeology explains this with ropes, log rollers, and huge human effort, hundreds of people pulling statues slowly for weeks or months. Rapa Nui oral tradition tells it differently. The moai walked. The phrase appears again and again. They did not roll or slide. They walked, moved by mana, spiritual power directed through ritual and song. Call it a metaphor if you want, but the legends may be hiding a real method in myth language, preserving a memory. but the technique so strange to later people that it sounded magical. Experimental archaeologists have shown Moai can walk upright by rocking them side to side, while pulling ropes, a method that looks like walking and needs fewer people than dragging. Maybe the legends describe that exact method. Or maybe they hint at something even more advanced technology using leverage, balance, or ideas we have not yet rediscovered. Either way, the stories insist the ancestors had knowledge now lost. Methods now forgotten, abilities now out of reach. The Napu's wall, then, is not a weird exception. It is a signature, one more point in a network that crosses the Pacific and reaches back to South America. The architectural language seen in Peru appears again on Easter Island, not as a clumsy copy, but as a faithful repeat done with skill that matches the source. The ocean did not isolate these cultures. It connected them. When sea levels were lower, when coastlines stretched farther, when islands now drowned still dotted the Pacific, the ocean may have been the world's first highway. A web of currents and seasonal winds linking continents in ways we are only starting to understand. A seafaring culture moving through this network could have spread knowledge across thousands of miles, leaving architectural signatures wherever they landed. The Napu becomes the fourth anchor: Peru, Lebanon, Bolivia, and now a volcanic island lost in the Pacific. Each site far apart, yet sharing techniques too specific to dismiss as chance. The pattern keeps growing. The oldest layers are the most advanced. The methods appear with no warning and vanish without leaving clear traces. The silence in the record becomes louder, and the Pacific, rather than separating cultures, becomes a thread stitching together pieces of a story we thought was gone. From the Andes to the isolation of Easter Island, the same engineering grammar returns: precision, huge scale, and knowledge that seems to arrive fully formed before fading into legend. How many more times must this repeat before coincidence becomes impossible? The journey continues, not deeper into the Pacific, but back toward unexpected ground, toward a continent that should not connect to this story at all. From the isolation of Easter Island, the trail seems to freeze. Logic says the pattern should end here, limited to South America, the Mediterranean, and one Pacific outpost. Ancient sea travel might link Peru to Polynesia. Trade routes might connect Lebanon to Egypt. But North America sits outside this network, separated from the Andes by the Isthmus of Panama, from Easter Island by thousands more miles of ocean, from Lebanon by a full Atlantic crossing. North America should not connect to this story. Yet in the mountains of southwestern Montana, in the Tobacco Root Range, where granite peaks rise above lodgepole pine forests, there is a formation that challenges every idea about isolated cultural development. It is called Sage Wall, and it speaks the same architectural language as Sacsayhuman, despite being separated from Peru by 4,500 miles and an entire continent. The wall should not be there. Its presence in a landscape linked to indigenous cultures that mostly built with wood and earth forces a question archaeology has avoided. What if the megalithic tradition was not local, but worldwide? Sage Wall runs for about a mile along a ridge at roughly 8,000 feet. It is a line of huge granite blocks fitted in patterns that do not match normal geology. From far away, it looks like a stone rampart following the mountain's curve, rising in places to about 15 feet. Its shape is too regular to be only erosion. Get closer, and the structure's nature becomes clear. These are not random boulders dropped by glaciers or split by freeze-thaw cycles. They are polygonal blocks, many with multiple sides fitted together with edges that look like 3D puzzles. The joints are tight, not perfect, not like Peru, but exact enough to require purposeful shaping. Where stones touch, there are signs of grinding, places where rock was worked to make a closer fit. The granite is local, worn by Montana winters and summer storms, and covered in places by lichen that suggests great age. But the way the blocks are arranged does not look like natural collapse. The wall follows steady lines. Stones nest together in ways that spread weight. The biggest blocks anchor the bottom, while smaller stones fill gaps above, a building order that suggests planning, not accident. And then there are the knobs. Several blocks, especially near edges and corners, have small granite bumps sticking out. They have no clear use. They do not strengthen the wall. They do not help modern climbing or navigation. Yet they are there, clearly visible, weathered but still intact. They match the knobs found at Sacsayhuman. Stand at Sage Wall with photos of Peruvian megalithic sites, and the comparison becomes impossible to ignore. The polygonal fitting echoes Andean masonry. The scale, though smaller, shares the same ambition. And the knobs, those puzzling bumps seen across megalithic sites worldwide, appear again here, 4,500 miles north of where they are most common. Either the same building mints had reached Montana separately, or knowledge traveled farther than standard history allows. Researchers studying Sage Wall have documented another strange detail: magnetic irregularities in certain stones. Compasses near some blocks act oddly. Needles spin and refuse to settle on north. Handheld magnetometers show readings not normal for granite. Granite has tiny amounts of magnetite and other iron-bearing minerals, so it can have weak magnetic effects. But the readings at Sage Wall are stronger than usual background levels. Some stones are magnetic enough to push compass needles, when held just inches away, while nearby stones show no unusual magnetism at all. The pattern is uneven, focused on certain stones as if they were chosen or treated differently during placement. This mirrors observations at Baalbek, where certain trilithin blocks show magnetic properties not explained by normal composition. It also echoes reports from Peru, where magnetized stones have been recorded at multiple sites. The mystery grows deeper. Why would stones in a wall show selective magnetism unless something changed their magnetic signature? Theories gather around heat treatment. Granite exposed to extreme heat can undergo magnetic changes as iron-bearing minerals shift. Lightning can magnetize rock, but not in the selective pattern seen at Sagewall. Some suggest the stones were involved in ancient metalworking, though no signs of smelting have been found nearby. Others suggest unknown methods using electromagnetic fields or resonance that left leftover magnetism inside the stone. Whatever the reason, the magnetic anomalies suggest human interaction beyond simply quarrying and stacking. They hint at processes now lost, knowledge now forgotten, abilities that leave measurable traces we still cannot explain. The argument over Sagewall's origin divides researchers into two groups. One group says it is completely natural, made by weathering and tectonic cracking. The other says the evidence points to human change, if not full construction. The natural explanation is based on geology. Granite breaks along weak lines set by crystal structure. Freeze-thaw cycles split stone along these natural planes, weathering round edges, creating shapes that can look polygonal. What seems like fitting might be accidental nesting of naturally broken blocks. But geology struggles to explain how consistent Sagewall is. Natural cracking creates disorder, random directions, uneven spacing, collapsed areas. Sagewall shows structure blocks lined along a steady ridge, stones layered with a sense of order, places where small stones clearly fill gaps between larger ones. The knobs are also hard to explain through geology. Erosion does not usually create uniform bumps at important structural points. The human origin view accepts that natural cracking mattered, but argues people improved the formation. The idea is that ancient builders used naturally cracked granite, selected blocks, moved them, ground edges for a better fit, and stacked them into defensive or ceremonial shapes. The result would mix nature and human work, stone shaped first by geology, then organized by people. This middle view explains why the site is unclear. Sagewall would be neither purely natural nor fully built like Sacsayhuman. It would be a hybrid, nature providing the raw stone, humans giving it order. But if humans shaped Sagewall, who were they, and when did they do it? Here, the silence grows heavier. Montana's indigenous peoples Crow, Blackfeet, Salish, and others have rich oral histories going back centuries, telling of sacred mountains, spiritual beings, migrations, battles, and alliances. Yet none of the recorded traditions describe building stone walls like Sagewall. That absence stands out. Indigenous cultures often keep detailed knowledge of their lands, passing down stories of how landmarks formed, what happened at certain places, which ancestors shaped the world. A Sagewall were a major construction by any known indigenous culture within remembered history. We would expect some mention of it, even as a small legend. The silence suggests either the wall is older than the arrival of current indigenous groups in the area, or it was built by people whose traditions were lost through displacement or disaster. Montana's human history goes back at least 13,000 years to the Clovis culture and earlier. A Sagewall is older than even those earliest known inhabitants. It pushes the timeline into a place archaeology finds uncomfortable, a North American megalithic tradition existing before any known culture able to do such work. The other option is that Sagewall is fully natural, and the similarities to Peru, the knobs, the magnetism, the organized layout are all just chance. But chance feels less believable as the evidence stacks up. Adding North America to the megalithic pattern changes everything. If the same architectural signatures show up in Montana as in Peru, Lebanon, Bolivia, and Easter Island, then the phenomenon is not regional. It cannot be explained by small cultural sharing along trade routes or coastal sailing. The pattern becomes global. Polygonal masonry appears across 10,000 miles. Knobs appear on multiple continents. Magnetic anomalies repeat at sites separated by oceans. The silence repeats everywhere, too. No culture that inherited these structures left clear records of their construction. The match is too specific. The distances are too huge. The silence is too consistent. Either we accept a chain of unbelievable coincidences, separate invention of the same techniques in isolated places, or we consider a more disturbing idea a single source, a shared knowledge system that spread worldwide before any civilization we currently recognize, leaving stone signatures as proof. Sagewall may be rough compared to Peru. Its fitting may not reach Pumapunku's millimeter perfection. But its existence in Montana adds a crucial point. It stretches the pattern beyond the expected paths of ancient civilization into lands conventional archaeology treats as outside megalithic culture. If the pattern reaches Montana, where else does it reach? What other sites have been called natural formations or credited to cultures that inherited rather than created them? How much of the megalithic record is still unseen, hidden in plain sight, waiting for people willing to connect the dots? 5 anchors now hold the thread of a forgotten story: Peru, Lebanon, Bolivia, Easter Island, and Montana. 5 points across the world, yet speaking the same architectural language. The pattern hardens. The coincidences pile up past believability, and the journey continues not west or south, but into the frozen mountains of the north, where the largest work stones on earth sit waiting in silence. From Montana's granite ridges, the pattern leads to the most unexpected place yet: the frozen mountains of southern Siberia, where winter temperatures drop to 40 below zero, and forests stretch unbroken to the horizon. Here, in the Shoria Mountains near the Kazakhstan border, stands a formation that dwarfs every megalithic site studied so far. Locals call it Gornaya Shoria, the mountain of Shoria. Whatever its true name once was, if it had one, has been lost. What remains are granite and quartzite blocks so huge they challenge not only explanation, but imagination. Some estimates place single stones at over 3,000 tons, 3 times the weight of Baalbek's Trilithon, 15 times the largest blocks of Saxaeum, and heavier than any known work stone anywhere on Earth. They rise in terrace-like steps along the mountainside, stacked in layers like megalithic staircases climbing toward the peaks. These blocks are not rough and messy. Their surfaces show flat plains. Their edges show straight lines. Where they meet, seams run with a precision that natural cracking struggles to explain. Stand before them, and scale stops making sense. A person looks tiny, an insect next to monuments made for giants. These are not just stones. They are mountains cut into blocks. Geology rearranged at a scale that blurs the line between landscape and construction. The debate about Gornaya Shoria is like the debate at Sage Wall, but louder because of the impossible size. Geologists point to natural causes: columnar jointing as magma cools, tectonic cracking along fault lines, erosion exposing bedrock in regular patterns. Granite breaks in predictable ways. Erosion follows weak lines. What looks built might be nature's architecture, amazing, but not man-made. Yet the counter-arguments remain. The blocks look too regular, the seams too straight, the terraces too organized. Natural cracking can make patterns, but it also makes randomness. Gornaya Shoria shows consistency that suggests selection and arrangement. Some blocks look stacked on purpose: smaller stones perched on bigger bases in ways that should collapse if left to gravity alone. Flat plains and rectangled corners appear too often to feel like a rare accident. Then there are signs of heat. Certain blocks show discoloration and surface changes that match extreme temperatures: patches of vitrification, smoothing that looks melted, and color shifts that suggest thermal change. Forest fires might explain some heating, but not the selective patterns seen. Lightning confused rock surfaces, but not cross many blocks in matching areas. Some researchers suggest heat-based working methods: temperatures high enough to soften granite for a time or change its surface, so it could be shaped. Others suggest evidence of ancient catastrophe: a massive firestorm or other event, hot enough to affect stone itself. Central Asian legends hold memories of a world before the flood civilizations, erased by disaster. Altaic and Turkic traditions speak of cities swallowed by water, mountains that walked, stones that moved at the command of forgotten sorcerkings. Russian folk tales from the region tell of Bogatyrs, giant heroes who shaped the land before history, who built with stones no ordinary person could lift. Call these stories fantasy. Yet the pattern repeats: earlier builders, greater abilities, knowledge lost through catastrophe. The legends also fit with geological evidence of huge disruptions at the end of the Ice Age: meltwater floods that cut valleys, climate shifts that reshaped land, upheavals violent enough to scatter massive stones like tours. Gornaya Shoria shows hints of that kind of ruin. Blocks lie toppled, their original arrangement broken. Formations that might have been walls or platforms now lie scattered across slopes in messy chaos. The terraces suggest plant structure, but parts have collapsed as if earthquakes or floods destroyed their bases. The site speaks of ambition: interrupted construction stopped not by choice, but by nature's force. Time and wilderness reclaim what civilization made, burying evidence under forest and frost. Siberia becomes the sixth anchor, and maybe the most important. A stones weighing 3,000 tons shows signs of human handling, even partial shaping or arranging. Then ancient ability reached a scale conventional history cannot accept. These are not stones you move with ropes and patience. These are masses that would challenge modern engineers. Yet they sit here in patterns that resist randomness, showing straight seams, flat surfaces, terraces, echoes of the same architectural language found in Peru, Lebanon, Bolivia, Easter Island, and Montana. The pattern closes its global loop. From the Andes to the Levant, across the Pacific to North America, and finally into Asia's frozen mountains, the same impossible masonry returns. The oldest stones remain the biggest. The methods appear without a clear beginning, and the silence of history deepens with each new site. 6 anchors, 6 continents touched, 1 forgotten story written in stone. 6 sites, 3 continents, 10,000 miles apart. Yet when you place the evidence side by side, the links become impossible to ignore. The stones speak the same language. Polygonal masonry, many-sided blocks fitted like 3D puzzles, appears in Peru, Easter Island, and Montana. Megalithic scale stones weighing hundreds to thousands of tons defines Baalbek, Pumapunku, and Gornaya Shoria. Knobs stick out from blocks of Sacsayhuman, Ollantaytambo, Baalbek, and Sage Wall. Scoop marks curved ends as if stone was softened repeat across Andean sites. Straight cuts and drill holes with millimeter precision mark Pumapunku and Ollantaytambo. Magnetic anomalies cluster in certain stones at Baalbek, Sage Wall, and elsewhere. Heat-altered surfaces appear at Gornaya Shoria and Pumapunku. These are not fuzzy similarities. They are technical signature-specific solutions repeated at places that should not be connected. The odds of separate invention drop with every shared detail. When a dozen signatures match across 6 locations separated by oceans and continents, coincidence becomes mathematically unreasonable. The pattern is global. The techniques are the same, and the timeline flips what we expect of progress. Yet nowhere in recorded history, not in Egyptian papyri, not in Mesopotamian tablets, not in Roman engineering texts, not in Inca quipus, does any civilization claim these works or explain how they were built. Cultures that recorded daily rituals, wars, trade, and astronomy somehow failed to mention the greatest engineering achievements ever attempted. The Inca built on foundations they could not copy. The Romans raised temples on platforms they did not make. The Tiwanaku inherited Pumapunku's precision, but could not match it. The Easter Islands later people respected walls, built in a style they no longer controlled. The silence is not random. It is evidence of inheritance, not invention. Each culture found ancient megalithic foundations already old, already weathered, already beyond their ability to reproduce. They honored what they found, built around it, and folded it into their own stories, but they did not build it. The knowledge belonged to an earlier time, before their histories began. What could erase such knowledge so completely? The answer may be written in geology and myth in ice cores, and flood stories in the catastrophic upheavals at the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 to 11,000 years ago. Global temperatures rose fast. Ice sheets over North America and Eurasia some more than a mile thick melted in what is, geologically speaking, an instant. Meltwater pulses raised sea levels over 300 feet, drowning coastlines where most humans likely lived. River valleys became seas. Islands disappeared. Entire landscapes were redrawn. Some researchers point to signs of comet impacts in this period, the Younger Dryas boundary layer, with platinum anomalies, nanodiamonds, and spherules linked to extraterrestrial events. Whether impact or climate change alone, the result was civilization collapse on a scale hard to imagine. Myths worldwide remember Gilgamesh's flood, Noah's deluge, Manu's ark, Greek cataclysms, Andean stories of Viracocha rising after destruction, Polynesian tales of worlds drowned and reborn. These are not isolated fantasies. They are global testimony of shared trauma, memories of a world undone. If an advanced seafaring civilization existed before the floods, its cities would now lie beneath 300 feet of ocean. Its ports, trade routes, and coastal centers erased. Only the highest, most remote constructions would survive: mountaintop fortresses, inland temples, monuments built to last. The megaliths may be survivor architecture, foundations engineered to outlive catastrophe. Placed above expected flood levels, built from materials that resist fire and water. This supports the mother culture idea: pre-ice age civilization, possibly maritime, with advanced knowledge, spreading it globally before being erased by cataclysm. Not Atlantis as pure fantasy, but a real culture lost to geological disaster, remembered only through stone and broken myth. Such a civilization would explain the worldwide spread of identical techniques, the presence of high engineering in the oldest layers, and the later decline as survivors tried to keep scraps of knowledge in a world that had changed completely. But what technologies did they have? The evidence hints at abilities beyond simple tools. Stone softening, chemical or heat methods making rock temporarily flexible. Heat-controlled temperatures carefully managed to change surface properties. Acoustic levitation sound used to reduce effective weight or split stone along chosen lines. Magnetic resonance methods, using or creating magnetic fields. Geopolymer techniques, molding stone like concrete before it hardens. These are not claims of invention. They are attempts to explain what we cannot explain, bridges between what exists and what should be possible. The stones show marks of processes we do not recognize, tool traces from implements we cannot name, precision from methods we have not recovered. The conclusion becomes hard to avoid. The megaliths are not separate puzzles. They are pieces of one forgotten story, a civilization that mastered stone, crossed oceans, and built to survive forever before catastrophe erased it from history. Everything points to one origin, one knowledge base, one lost world, waiting in the stones for us to remember. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world pauses between night and day, the megaliths stand as they always have, immovable, silent, waiting. They are not ruins. They were never meant to fall apart. They are survivor monuments, built by people who knew catastrophe was coming and chose stone as their voice across time. Think about it. If you knew your world was ending, floods rising, fire falling, everything you built being swept away, how would you save what mattered? Not on papyrus, which burns. Not in wood, which rots. Not in clay tablets, which shatter. You would choose stone, the one material that lasts when everything else fails. And you would build impossibly large, impossibly precise, so that whoever comes later, centuries or thousands of years after, would understand one clear truth. We were not primitive. We knew. We mastered matter and design. We were here. The megaliths are not monuments to kings or gods. They are messages to the future, written not in words but in geometry, in scale, and in joints that refuse to give way. They speak just by existing, through the questions they force us to ask. On every inhabited continent, the same stories repeat: floods that drowned the world, fire from the sky, seas rising overnight, the golden age destroyed, and humanity starting again from scraps. The Greeks called it the age of Saturn, lost to Zeus's lightning. Hindus spoke of cycles, yugas of rise and fall. The Maya recorded multiple creations, each ending in catastrophe. The Andeans remembered Viracocha rising from water to rebuild. The Sumerians preserved Isutra's flood. The Hebrews told of Noah's Ark. These are not just myths. They are memories, shared testimony of shared trauma, passed down by generations who saw the world break. And archaeology supports them: rapid sea level rise, climate collapse, megafauna extinctions, human population bottlenecks coming together around 12,000 years ago. The stones survived what the stories describe. They are physical proof that something came before knowledge that existed and was lost, and that we are not the first to reach for mastery over matter. Stand before Sacsayhuman at twilight, when shadows slide between the blocks and the walls seem to breathe. Walk the trillion base of Baalbek, where Roman columns rise from foundations they did not build. Touch the H blocks of Pumapunku, feeling surfaces smooth like glass. Trace the polygonal seams of Vinapu, where Pacific waves have crashed for thousands of years without shifting a single stone. Listen, the stones whisper the same message in every language across every ocean. We were here. We knew. We endured. They remind us that history is not a straight line, but a circle: civilizations rising, falling, rising again. Knowledge can be lost as easily as it is gained. What we call modern may be rediscovered techniques and insights that others had long before us, then lost to catastrophe. The megaliths do not ask us to worship them. They ask us to remember, to look past official stories, to question what we think we know, and to stay humble before the possibility that we are not the peak of human achievement, but one chapter in a much longer story. In the stones, we see ourselves: ambitious, clever, desperate to leave something that lasts longer than our short time here. And in their silence, we hear a question echoing across thousands of years. When our turn comes, what will we choose to survive?